Hello, I'm Gretchen Sable. I'm president of League of Women Voters, ABC, and we're very pleased today to have with us the man who needs no introduction, Mel Aanerud, Elector. So Mel's wife is actually the president of our league, and we're very fortunate to have Mel supporting our league in different ways, and tonight is one of them. Mel's going to give us a first-person account of his experiences as 10% of all the Minnesota electors this year, and I'll let you take it away.
Okay, I'm going to do most of about. I'm going to give you a program on the Electoral College first, and then I'll deal with how it was this time as opposed to times in the past. So I know that all of you know that when you vote for president, you're not really voting for president. You're voting for 10 people that are going to be the electors from the state of Minnesota. This happens to be the electors from 2016. You will not have a picture like this for the electors in 2020 because of COVID-19. They wouldn't let us get that close together without, well, even with masks, they didn't let us get that close together. You may know some of these people. Betsy O'Barry is a member, I think, and she's right in the middle. You may know Mary Murphy, who's with the red jacket. She has been a state legislator for many, many years. Marge Hoffa in the blue jacket is the vice chair of the Minnesota DFL. What I've been listening to lots of programs about the Electoral College. And I want to correct a lot of the things that I've been hearing that people have incorrect. One of the things that I've heard at least two political scientists now say is that this is something that that was designed by the framers of our Constitution, and that is just not true. There have been things like the College of Electors all the way back to 389 of the Common Era, when German kings used to elect their leaders. Early Germanic law stated that German kings had to be led by the support of their nobles, so the nobles would vote to be who was going to be king. In 389, the kings elected Pepin the Short was elected the first Frankish nobles, and the Holy Roman Empire used to elect their leaders by a council of prince electors. In the Middle Ages, matter of fact, that went from the Middle Ages all the way to 1806. Obviously, we all know about the Western Christian Church. The Pope has been elected by the College of Cardinals since 1059. In Prussia, for example, from 1849 to 1918, voters elected electors, and that group of electors then elected the deputies that would go to the Prussian House of Representatives. Such indirect suffrage was a means to make sure that they were getting able people. Even today in the Netherlands, the deputies of the first chamber are elected by provincial parliaments. These provincial parliaments are elected then by elect the first chamber delegates. There are a number of countries that use electoral colleges. They're listed there on the screen. Within China, Macau, and Hong Kong, each have electoral colleges that function as they do here to pick the chief executives. In the island of Guernsey, an electoral college called the State of Electors chooses the state that island's jurists. The country of Georgia has decided that they will start using an electoral college to elect the president beginning in 2024. So some people are going the other way. In the United States, among the many thorny questions debated by the delegates at the 1787 Constitutional Convention, was one of the hardest to resolve was how to elect the president. The founding fathers debated for months, with some arguing for Congress to pick the president and others insisting that it be a popular vote. They were used to what happened at the Continental Congress. In the Continental Congress, each state had one vote. States' rights position was indeed the law of the land at the time. The big states wanted the popular vote because that would give them more influence, and the smaller states wanted one vote per state, which would give them more influence. Remember, however, that the Constitution never says anything about us being a democracy. Until it was amended, it never said anything about the people's right to vote. They did have goals at the Continental Congress and changing the form of government, but it was not to make it more democratic, although they did form a government that would protect individual rights. Their compromise in in selecting a president was the Electoral College. The system calls for creation every 4 years of a temporary group of electors equal to the total number of representatives in Congress. Technically, it is these electors and not the American people who vote for president. In modern elections, the first candidate to get to 270 or of the 538 total electoral votes wins the White House. At the time of the Philadelphia Convention, no other country in the world directly elected their chief executive. So the delegates were wading into uncharted territory. Further complicating the task was the deep-rooted distrust of executive power. After all, the fledgling nation had just fought its way out from under a tyrannical king and overreaching colonial governors. They didn't want another despot on their hands. One group of delegates felt strongly that Congress shouldn't have anything to do with picking a president. There was too much opportunity, they thought, of chicanery, that chummy corruption between the executive and the legislative branch. Another camp was dead set against letting people elect the president by a straight popular vote. First, they thought 18th century voters lacked the resources to fully be informed about candidates, especially in rural areas. Secondly, they feared a headstrong Democratic mob steering the country astray. And third, a populist president appealing directly to the people could command a dangerous amount of power. They reasoned that if they were going to build a bridge, you would get an expert engineer. Why then would you choose a leader? Would you make it a popularity contest? Instead, they allowed experts to pick the best person. Out of these drawn out debates came a compromise based on the idea of electoral intermediaries. These intermediators wouldn't be picked by Congress or elected by the people. Instead, the states would each appoint independent electors who would cast the actual ballots for president. And they would do that within their own states. They didn't want these electors getting together. I know somebody thought that they all went to Washington and voted. But we don't. We go to our state capitals and vote. And that was on purpose. They didn't want those electors to all get together for fear they'd make some compromises and make some trades. But determining exactly how many electors would be assigned to each state was another sticking point. Here the divide was between slave owners and non-slave owning states, and of course between the big states and the small states. It was the same issue that plagued the distribution of seats in the House of Representatives. Should or shouldn't the founders include slaves in counting the state population? In 1787, roughly 40% of the people living in the South were black slaves who couldn't vote. The result was the controversial 3-5 compromise, in which black slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a person for the purpose of allocating representation, electors, and calculating federal taxes. The compromise ensured that the southern states would ratify the Constitution, and it gave Virginia, the home of more than 200,000 slaves, and a quarter of the total electoral votes at the time required to win the presidency. And 4 of the first 5 presidents were from Virginia because of that. By giving 3 votes to each state, regardless of their population, ensured that the small states would agree to the Constitution. 3 for 2 senators and at least 1 member of the House of Representatives. Another very valid reason for the Electoral College was that people did not know who they were voting for. People in rural Georgia would not have even met, certainly, and wouldn't even know who John Adams or James Madison were. But they would know the people from their area who were the electors, and they wanted persons whom they could trust to vote for their advantage. By and large, early on, electors were selected by state legislators, not by the popular vote. Remember, the Constitution left it up to the states to determine how electors would run within those states. Individual discretion, not the dictates of the state or national party. Today, most of those electors are bound to their party's candidate. The founding fathers, when they created our nation, were not big believers in democracy. When they developed representation, they gave representation to the people in the House of Representatives, but left it to the states who the voters were. And at first, most states only had landed white men. And even more important, the Constitution says nothing about how the states would allot their electoral votes. The assumption was that each elector vote would be counted independently. But with the development of political parties, all states became winner-take-all states. So the electors were selected by the legislature and felt bound to vote for the candidate who got the majority vote within that state. This winner-take-all system works in 49 of the 51 places where they have electors. 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, passed laws not to give all the electoral votes to the candidate who wins the state's popular vote, but provides 2 to the state and then the rest of their votes by a congressional district. That's why, although Biden won Maine, Trump got 1 electoral vote in Maine, and although Trump won in Nebraska, Biden got 1 electoral vote out of Nebraska. The founders also assumed that most presidential elections would be decided by neither the people nor the electors, but by the House of Representatives. According to the Constitution, if no single candidate won a majority of the electoral votes, the decision would go to the House, where each state gets 1 vote. Each state gets 1 vote. So, with the new if this election were to go to the House of Representatives, with Minnesota having 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats, we would have no vote. Unless one of the Republicans were willing to vote for the Democrat or the Democrat was willing to vote for the Republican. The biggest vote, the biggest state, California, and the smallest state, Wyoming, each only had 1 vote. Since each state gets 1 vote, the states that have tied delegation, unless they can compromise, would get no votes at all. After the unanimous election of George Washington as the nation's first president, the founders figured that subsequent elections would feature many, many candidates who would divide up the electoral pie into tiny chunks, giving Congress then the chance to pick the winner. But as soon as national parties were formed, the number of presidential candidates shrank. Only 2 U.S. elections have been decided by the House of Representatives. One in 1800, and the last one was in 1824. If we had a popular vote system in 1860, no candidate would have gotten a majority. And if it would have gone to the House of Representatives, they would never have selected Lincoln. They would have selected the Southern Democrat, John Breckinridge. Each state gets 2 senators. And originally their election was left up to the states, and most of them were selected by the state legislature. So they represented land more than people. We may question today why the Senate should represent states, but it is one of the parts of the Constitution that can't be amended. I was listening to a political scientist just this past week who said, gee, we could solve this if we just pass a constitutional amendment, making the Senate popular, where they represented people rather than states. The amendment clause to the Constitution contains this language: no state without its consent shall be deprived the equal suffrage in the Senate. It cannot be changed by amendment. It says in the Constitution it can't be changed by amendment. The Electoral College has become more and more undemocratic with age. As people move from country to city, some states have become significantly larger in population, while others have actually gotten smaller. And yet every state begins with 2 votes, 1 for each senator, and at least 1 vote, they're a member of the House of Representatives. Therefore, each voter in North Dakota has a value of 2.25 votes for president for each Minnesota voter. So it takes us 2.5 votes voting Democrat to deal with 1 vote in North Dakota voting Republican. But again, we have an advantage over California. Our votes are worth 1.6 votes for every vote they have. If you look at the largest state and the smallest state, Wyoming, the smallest state, has a value of 3.6 votes per each Californian. In other words, it takes 3.6 voters in California voting Democrat to counter 1 voter in Wyoming voting Republican. Or every elector in California represents 712,000 people, and every elector in Wyoming only represents 195,000 people. So why does the Electoral College still exist? Well, despite its contentious origins and the awkward fit in modern politics, it exists. The party in power typically benefits from the existence of the Electoral College, and the minority party that has little chance of changing the system, because constitutional amendments require 2/3 supermajority in Congress, plus a ratification of 3/4 of the states. Plus, old school electoral systems have its benefits. With the Electoral College, for example, there's no chance of a runoff election or a protracted national recount. Think what would have happened in the 1960 election if there had been no Electoral College. John F. Kennedy's popular vote margin over Richard M. Nixon was 118,574 votes. If all 68,838,219 popular votes would have had to be poured into a single bucket, there would have been a powerful incentive on the part of Nixon to have a national recount of the 170,000 precincts. It would have been a long, devastating recount. There are 538 electors who, according to the system laid out in the Constitution, meet in their respective states and vote for president and vice president. These people, the electors, comprise the Electoral College, and they don't have a football team. And their votes are then counted by the president of the Senate in the joint session of Congress. So my 1 vote in Minnesota equates to 261,000, or 1/10 of the Minnesota voters. This map shows that most states have more voted one way since 2000, more often than not. It shows those states that have voted both ways in at least one election. And we can now add Georgia, and Arizona to those that have voted both ways. More to show the breakdown of votes in the U.S. Electoral College after apportionment based on the 2010 census. Now, we don't know what the 2020 census is going to do yet. We were on the cusp of losing one in Minnesota, but we don't know if that's going to happen or not. Now, according to let me get the question at the end. The Constitution, so because of the where are we? Because of the 1800 election, went to the House of Representatives because Thomas Jefferson, the man the Democratic Republican Party wanted as president, and Aaron Burr, the one they wanted as vice president, ended up having exactly the same number of electoral votes. Now, the Constitution says that the three highest vote getters go to the House and they decide. Well, in this case, they both had exactly the same number of votes. And the Congress at the time was controlled by the Federalists. The decision as to who would be president went on and on and on. If you remember back then, the president didn't take over until March. Well, they were into February and then they were into March before the decision was made. And the decision was made by a Federalist, Mr. Hamilton. Hamilton hated Jefferson, but he probably hated Burr more. And he finally convinced the Federalists to vote for Jefferson, and then Burr became vice president. So the 12th Amendment was passed. The 12th Amendment says that the electors would vote a separate ballot for president and a separate ballot for vice president. But then they added all kinds of other what ifs in the 12th Amendment. For instance, what if we went to the House of Representatives and they couldn't decide who the president should be? Then the Senate would meet and they would decide who the vice president would be. And the vice president would become president interim until the House could decide. Now, if the Senate couldn't decide by the time now January 20th came along, then the Speaker of the House becomes interim president. So indeed, if this had gone to the House and they couldn't decide, Nancy Pelosi could indeed have become president. The 20th Amendment changed the deadlines for the actual votes from March 4th to January 20th. Most states, except Maine and Nebraska, which split some of their electoral votes by congressional district, give all the electoral votes to the person who won the popular vote in that state. There are many, many Democrats in parts of Texas, and there are very many Republicans in California, for instance, but unless the state moves to apportion their electoral votes differently, the one that wins the state gets all the votes. The 23rd Amendment to the Constitution gave Washington, D.C. 3 votes in the Electoral College. A popular vote system certainly would be simpler to understand. However, as proponents of the Electoral College point out, if you thought a recount in Florida in 2000 was nasty, imagine a nationwide recount of over 130 million votes, and that would really be messy. And it could happen. Some states have automatic recounts if candidates are separated by less than 0.1%. And indeed, that happened this year in more than one state. 2016, there was 136 million voters. That would have been a margin of around 136,000 votes. And it was within, could in any given state be well within that. Early in the United States history, state legislators were essentially electors for both the U.S. Senate and even the Federal Electoral College itself. Prior to 1913, U.S. state legislators appointed the U.S. senators in their respective states, and they appointed the members of the Electoral College. By 1872, the U.S. presidential electors were in most states chosen by the state were chosen by vote rather than by state legislators. Matter of fact, the switch started in 1824 because state legislators have so much influence over the federal elections. State legislative elections are frequently proxy votes, were proxy votes for the Senate or the presidency. For instance, the famed 1858 Lincoln-Douglas debates reported to be held during the U.S. Senate campaign in Illinois actually occurred during the election for Illinois state legislators. Neither Lincoln nor Douglas's name appeared on any ballot. Douglas was selected by the senators as senator by the state legislature. As late as 1952, the Illinois ballot listed all the electors on the ballot. The people had to vote for them all, one at a time. So if that were the case in Minnesota this time, you'd had to vote for 10 of us. As a matter of fact, the Republicans in 1952 had a piece of literature that they put out to their members that showed here are the electors that you're supposed to vote for. They had a big arrow going to it so that they would know which ones they were supposed to vote for. And so many of them actually put the arrow in that their votes were thrown out. Only 5 times in history did the presidential candidate that won the popular vote lost the electoral vote. But 5 times is considered too many and has led some to question why Americans could use this system to elect their president. John Quincy Adams lost the popular vote to Andrew Jackson. It went to the House of Representatives. Supposedly there was a deal made with Henry Clay. John Adams made him Secretary of State, and he swung votes to Adams rather than to Jackson. If you think we've had a bad election, Rutherford B. Hayes lost the popular vote and he lost the electoral vote. But we still had troops in the South, and there were 3 southern states that sent 2 groups of electors. One that was elected and the other one that was sent by the troops. Rutherford B. Hayes made a deal with the Southern Democrats that if he could get those 3 states to vote for him in the House, he would remove the troops from the South. And indeed, Rutherford B. Hayes won the Electoral College by 1 vote. Benjamin Harrison lost the popular vote to Grover Cleveland and won. Grover Cleveland came back 4 years later and won the presidency, however, from him. So, and we all know about George W. Bush, and we all know about Donald Trump. 65% of the Americans support selecting the president by a popular vote, compared to 32% who prefer the Electoral College. This was in a June 2018 PRRI Atlantic survey. However, get this now, when the Pew survey did asked the same questions, but they said, now don't forget, this is going to mean changing the Constitution. The number of people who wanted to actually change the Constitution to have a popular vote dropped to 55%. Still a majority, but a significantly smaller one. The Electoral College is written into the Constitution, and changing the Constitution is very difficult. It takes 2/3 of majorities of Congress and 3/4 of the state legislatures. States that currently benefit from the Electoral College would have to give up some of their power. There are more states that are small and have more power because of it than big states that would be better off by having straight elections. The constitutional amendment is considered a long shot. That said, the Electoral College has actually been changed 3 times. And I've covered those 3 constitutional amendments: the 12th, the 23rd, and the 20th, and the one that that brought 20th and the 23rd that brought in the District of Columbia. In 1968, we came closest to changing the Constitution. The House actually did pass a popular vote system. It was filibustered in the Senate, however, and it never came out of Congress. There are some other possibilities. One of them is an agreement among states to honor the national popular vote. If we can get enough states to add up to 270 electoral votes, then indeed all those states would agree that regardless of how their state voted, that they would vote for the candidate that got the national popular vote. It sounds like a kind of a nice idea, except remember that this is just a simple state law. Now consider this. What if Minnesota joined this compact and they voted for a Democratic president and the Republican president won the national popular vote, and our 10 votes would have to vote for the Republican? I got a feeling that the Democratic legislature the next year would drop out of the compact, and probably the other way around in other states. The other way, there's a third way to do away with the Electoral College, and that's to allow proportional voting. Now, Nebraska and Maine kind of do that, but they don't, because 2 of their votes go to the winner of the state, and then 1 vote for each congressional district. Well, but we could pass individual laws in each individual state that would be proportional voting. This would give those Republicans in California some votes out of California. It would give the Democrats in Texas some votes out of Texas. In Minnesota, in this last election, we would have divided the vote 5 and 5. The state legislators, okay. So, are we going to see any change? Probably not. Probably not in the near future. I mean, if 2016 didn't stir enough emotion to change it, I don't know what will. But right now, it's just important that we elect good people as electors. I was one of the Minnesota 10 electors that voted for Joe Biden today at noon. That in itself disputes one of the concepts that the Electoral College uses in some states and even within this state. I am not an astronomical donator to the DFL. I provide time, but I don't have the money. In Minnesota on the DFL side, the electors are selected by the parties in convention assembled. They vote for who is going to be the electors. There are states where the parties decide who they are. For instance, in Minnesota on the GOP side, and sometimes it is the donors that get the spots. So I represented 321,681 Minnesotans, but nationally I represented 278,000. Minnesota do a little bit less leverage in the Electoral College than the national average. So let me cover some things about today. 4 years ago, I was at the Electoral College meeting. It was very informal, and people came, and there was a bit of come and go. 3 school classrooms came to watch it. The day before, they had to report to the governor. They drove down, and then they drove home. And then the next day, they drove down to do their voting. They actually could get a picture of all the electors. This year, it was very controlled because of COVID number one, because of possible demonstrations, and at least one elector claims that he was threatened. There's an old 1870 law that requires the electors to present themselves to the governor the day before the election. They wanted to ensure that all the electors would be at the Capitol, for the actual election. And that law is still in the books, and that's why those electors go to see the governor the day before. With added security this year, and Betsy will love this because she was there last year, but this year we had to report to a St. Paul hotel, and we're not even supposed to tell you now which hotel we were in because they don't want the hotel to be any demonstration at the hotel. On Sunday, the 13th, at 9:30 in the morning, we were given a room, and we went as a group to the Capitol to present ourselves to the governor. Because of COVID, the governor, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, and the state auditor cannot be in the same room at the same time. So we never did present ourselves to the governor, but we presented ourselves to the Secretary of State, who took it to the governor. At least they knew we were there. We actually went into the Capitol through the state office building because they didn't want us entering the Capitol because for fear there would be demonstrators at the Capitol. And so we went through the tunnels and came up through the basement. We took 4 secured vans, and there were highway patrols on nearly every corner. In the state office building, the Capitol, there were highway patrols at every place where we had to stop to go into, every turn we had to make, there was a highway patrol officer, at least one, and sometimes 2 and 3 to show us the way. We were then sequestered in our rooms. So this was 9:30 Sunday. We were sequestered in our rooms. At 10 o'clock, they even called us to make sure we were there. So I was there. I was sequestered from 9:30 on Sunday till 2 o'clock today. We were under guard, going to and from the Capitol. We couldn't take a picture as a group like they did in 2016 because of COVID. The highway patrol, I asked the highway patrol whether there really was any demonstrators because we went through a back door and through the tunnels, so we never saw the Capitol from the outside. And he said there was about a dozen demonstrators in the front of on the front steps of the Capitol. When I drove my way home from the hotel, I went by the Capitol just to take a look, and I counted 8 people still out there, some of them with their children. They had a big Trump banner, and they had another banner that I couldn't read, and I wasn't going to get any closer to see what it said. The highway patrolman said that at least one demonstrator showed up with his gun, and according to him, he was dressed very strangely, and they asked him to leave. The highway patrol did, and he left. So he wasn't around. It was far more informal 4 years ago, far more controlled this time, but it was certainly an interesting experience. And so I will take questions, I guess.
Does anybody have any questions for Mel?
Well, I just wanted to mention that Mel, I watched the whole ceremony. Here we are last year. I was one of the electors, and Mel was my alternate last year, so he'd seen what happened last year, or last time in 2016. It was fun to watch, and I saw you in that 3rd row spot, which was perfect. And I noticed that there were something like 1,200 people who watched the whole thing, which was kind of fun.
So 1,200 people watched. Okay.
Yeah, on the Secretary of State's YouTube channel. But congratulations, that is really a great honor to have been the person selected to do that. Very cool.
Now I know that the league is debating, and I don't know if have they taken a position or not. I'm not sure about the Electoral College. It's not an easy question because most of the only way to really change it is a constitutional amendment, and that's going to be almost impossible to do. The other two ways of doing it can be done, but it's by a simple state legislature doing a law that can be overturned the next legislative session. So it's a difficult thing to figure out. But
Well,
it's obviously
Mel,
unfair if popular vote people don't win the election. Yeah, I'm
Mel,
sorry.
how do you personally feel about the Electoral College
Oh, I don't
instead of
think,
the popular vote?
well, I don't think any of those elections that went against the popular vote was a good idea for the country. I mean, it just isn't. And it's not just Trump, but Gore and even I mean, any of them. None of them should have gone that way. I think the popular vote is the way to go. That wasn't what the original drafters of the Constitution were thinking. I know even within my family, I have a son that well, those states should have a right to have some say. And it all depends on whether you believe this is again, remember, the Constitution doesn't say that we have the right to vote until it was amended. There are some amendments that give people a right to vote, but never in the original document did it say you had a right to vote for anything. And it certainly didn't say it was a democracy. So if you want to be one of those constitutional, originalists, then you're never going to change it. But my God, you don't want to be an originalist, believe me. I'm sorry.
Mel, I think you brought a very good point that I've often said too, that people Republicans in California probably don't vote because they know, even for the senators, because they know they're going to be outvoted, so why bother taking the time? But if it was proportional, then you would see more Republicans in California voting, and wherever they say there's no real contest, there would be contest, I believe. So I would agree with you that it should be proportional voting so that Democrats in Texas would at least have an opportunity to make a dent in the election and all that. Same thing in New York State for the Republicans. So, and we wouldn't know how it would turn out until we had the election.
Yeah. You will see a letter in the Minneapolis paper signed by, I think, all the electors, saying that they want to see the method where the states will follow the popular vote. I think that's better than what we got. The only problem with it is that it can be overturned right away. But I really like proportional voting better than I like any of the rest of them.
Mel, just an observation. You share something from your story of today's experience. You share something with Abraham Lincoln. Remember that in 1861, they had to sneak him into Washington, D.C. on the trains in the middle of the night, just as they had to sneak you in through the tunnels at the state capitol. I think you can be proud of sharing that with him.
Well, I was really happy to see all the security there. I'm glad we didn't need it, but I was glad it was there just in case.
Mel or anyone else, this is Joan. The issue of if we want to be a constitutional originalist, number one, we'd have to be a property owner, and number two, we'd have to be a specific gender. And so I find it hard to be supportive, at least on that piece of being an originalist.
Somebody's talking, but I can't.
Somebody's talking, but we can't see him. Let's see here.
Well, I'm curious.
That's Joan. I heard Joan. Did anyone else?
You couldn't hear me? This is Joan.
We heard Joan,
Well,
but
we-
whoever came after Joan, we missed.
Okay. Well, Mel, I'm curious how you got chosen to be an elector and what it felt like this afternoon when you were sitting there in a room with just a couple other people and got to cast a vote that meant so much.
Yeah. I got elected because I asked the 6th District DFL to elect me. And I sat at home. The convention was held just like this by Zoom. So I was watching the vote come in, and there was a certain time when Mrs. Barber was running ahead, and I was quite defeated. Imagine how fast you could do that, but I got significantly more votes. So it's a matter of I ran for it. I asked people to vote for me, and I got elected the same way Betsy did 4 years ago, and the same way. Oh, my mind just went blank. We've had a third Anoka County person as an elector back in 2000. My mind just went blank. The person that's on the Soil and Water Conservation District now.
Mary Jo Trushan?
No,
Glenda.
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 Okay.
Glenda Macris.
I tried to find out if there were ever any others, and the information is over at the Historical Society, but they've only published back to 1996 or something like that. The information is there if you can go over and get it, but of course it's closed. So I think I will go that step further just for my own education to go back and see, because I'll bet you back in the, Anoka was a major city in the 1870s and so forth. I bet you there was other Anoka County people that have been electors, but I just don't know who else they were. The three of us I know, but that's all I know.
Yeah, right. Go ahead.
As a delegate this last year, I had an opportunity to vote for Mel. So I felt it was nice to know one of the electors and have a part, and actually I voted for him. That was cool.
Me too. I felt that it was cool. It was very cool, Mel, to see you down there. I was very proud of you.
I guess the way to become an elector is just be around longer than anybody else.
Maybe I should apply for that then.
My first campaign, I ran a fellow for city council 2 years before I could vote for him. But then the voting age was 21. And, I don't know if he ever knew. I know at his funeral, his wife came up to me, and I came and saw his wife. I said, "Do you remember who I am?" "Oh, yes, it was your fault." That was her reaction.
One unique.
So I've been a precinct chairman. I've been a precinct chairman for over 60 years. So
I read today that there was an elector, I think Michigan, but I'm not sure if that's right, who was 96 years old. He'd been in the party for 70 years, and he finally got to be an elector, and he was so excited at 96. So you still
this year?
Yes.
Oh no, he was elected as an alternate. As a matter of fact, it was Hank Fisher.
Not from Minnesota.
Oh, not from Minnesota.
Not from Minnesota.
Well, Hank Fisher must be getting awfully close to 90. Betsy, do you know? You know Hank, right?
I do, and I was really pleased to see that he was one of our alternates. I know that he was active back when Humphrey was a U.S. Senator.
Yeah.
But I don't know exactly how old he is. I thought it was kind of a shame that he didn't get elected as an elector, because it would have been very cool for him.
Yeah, I think so too.
And we don't know that he'll be here 4 years from now to run for that.
As a matter of fact, poor Hank, he fell and broke his pelvis after he was elected, and so he was hobbling around with a cane and so forth. I felt with my bad knees, I felt kind of good. I helped him in and out of the place. I felt much younger suddenly.
Mel, I have a question. how solemn was the occasion? Were you guys dressed? I mean, the picture from 4 years ago, everyone was, informal wear. I mean, suits and, dresses. Were you guys similarly dressed this year, or because it was going to be such a strange way, were you more casual?
They asked people to wear suits and tie and to dress in business attire, they said. That was their request. There were a couple of people that didn't do that, but by and large they did.
I'm just curious. Just curious.
Mel,
Yes.
it looked like there was a young person next to the guy with the white shirt and tie.
Yeah, that was his
Was
son.
that his son?
That was his son. He was 14 years old, and he was his guest. Yeah, Kathy was going to be my guest.
Who was your guest?
But she didn't. She couldn't make it, so I gave up the spot, and I was somebody else then got their guest in, and they were very, very happy because they were only going to allow 8 guests.
Oh,
Oh.
okay.
Mel, Mel, this is Joan. I
Yes.
would assume that the County Historical Society would have some kind of history of the electors, whether they were Republican, Democrat, Independent.
No, as a matter of fact, they don't. Matter of fact, they don't. I sent
They
them.
don't? Wow.
You might want to do that too, Betsy. I sent them all my a copy of all my documents,
Oh, I
so
can do that.
that they wouldn't need to have it. I'm going to ask Betsy to do that, and I'll ask. We'll see what we can. We'll build their repertoire. They don't have it at the moment.
I'd never thought of that, but I have all of those documents. So yeah, absolutely, I could send a copy.
Joan, I did. That was the first place I checked.
Okay. It just seemed like a natural place because there's so much history already saved in Anoka County, even though I'm not a resident.
Sure.
I know.
Well, as a matter of fact, hopefully I'll add to that as we go along. I'm gonna find out who else was, and I will get it in the Anoka County information so that they have it.
The County Historical Society, their mission is to record history of the county, not necessarily the state. So Mel, as a resident of the county, would be a person that they could record for, but not necessarily everybody else.
Yeah, that's what she was saying, Sandra. Whether we had other electors from the county, I know of 3, but we probably have had more, and I will find out who they are and get it to the county. County didn't know.
Well, that's interesting because I would have thought Republican or Democrat or Independent, they would have some kind of a track record, historical record.
Nope. Well, I think, how many of you, really now, think about it now, 8 years ago, how many of you even knew anybody that was in the Electoral College?
Yes.
Okay. It just, it just wasn't on people's minds. And I fear that, 4 years from now, it'll be out of people's minds again. And they won't even think about it until the next presidential election. And, oh my God, why are we doing this? If we couldn't make some changes after 2016, I don't know what it's going to take.
So Mel, Danica had a second part of her question, and that was, what did it feel like when you were sitting on the floor and participating?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking, there haven't been that many, in the whole history of the United States. I mean, there hasn't been that many electors, and to think that I was there and be able to represent all those people. I mean, thousands. I mean, I represented thousands of people from the state of Minnesota. Yeah, it hits you. It's kind of, wow, this is really amazing. That think of this poor guy from Ham Lake is sitting here doing this. I mean, this is really quite amazing. And I think you put some time and effort into it. Betsy, how you've been involved for a long time. How did it feel to you?
Same thing, you feel like you're a part of history. Of course, was very bittersweet because I was voting for Hillary Clinton, who I knew.
That's true.
But, you know, one of the reasons why I had run to be an elector is I really wanted to be a presidential elector when we finally elected our first woman president. And I was, but she didn't win the Electoral College. She won the popular vote.
See, I did much better than Betsy. I actually voted for the winner.
Mel, you've hit, this is Joan again. I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but you hit on I think a reason why it is not likely to have much power to change to straight popular vote, because so many states will become or feel they will become flyover country. And so so it will be a matter of winning maybe California, New York, and Texas, or Florida, and the rest of us will not stand a chance.
Sure.
I suspect that that's probably why it is still lasting as long as it has.
Well, primarily it's the fact that we have that the states that are big states are getting bigger and bigger, and the states that are small states are not growing nearly as fast, or actually getting smaller. Yeah. And yet the amount of power they have remains the same. So Wyoming has 3 votes. If they lose, West Virginia has 3 votes, and you saw on the picture that they're losing population. They're still they're gonna have, when everyone moves out of the hills there, they will still have 3 votes. And so why would they go to another system?
Yeah.
It makes no sense to them at all. So there's no way we can get 3/4 of the states unless somebody's willing to give up some power that they already have. And people normally, especially politicians, they don't want to do that. They don't want to give up any power that they have. So there may be some ways that state legislators might be able to do it, either proportional voting or the winner, or the winner of the popular vote gets all the electoral votes. But again, I really am concerned about that, because it's a state law. It will become a state law that can be overturned tomorrow by another state legislature.
Yep.
And I can't figure out a way for the constitutional amendment to get passed. So you might be stuck with this for a long, long time.
Well, but your League of Women Voters has 2 living presidential electors from the last few years, which is kind of interesting when you think of how few people become presidential electors. The fact that Mel and I know each other pretty well, but also we're a member of this small group, and these are active, interested people.
Well, and Glenda too, so that's 3.
Yeah.
So we have 3 of us. So anyhow, it's about 7:30, so I'm going to thank Mel, and we're going to give him a not just virtual clap, but a real clap. So thank you very much for your time, Mel, and for the program, and thank you for everybody joining, and for our members of the press, thank you for being here, and we'll catch up with you all in a bit. Thank you.